Welcome to the Art and Science of Complex Sales, proudly presented by Membrane. This podcast is your gateway to mastering the craft of modern selling. If you're passionate about growth, impact, and unlocking full potential in sales and revenue, you're in the right place. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And now let's get started with today's guest.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Art and Science of Complex Sales. Today we are talking with Richard Pohl, CEO and founder of Noodle over in the UK. He has been in sales, both carrying a bag and leading for over 37 years. Started slinging the first Mac back in the day and has seen the changes that have happened in sales. Today he is helping us uncover some of the challenges in B2B sales and what to do about them. Let's get started with Richard Pohl. Richard Pohl, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing great. Welcome to the show. And we've had to, truth be told, this has been a long time coming. I was down sick for a while, but thanks for rescheduling with me.
Yeah, we've had a few false starts.
That's all right. No worries. No worries at all. So, hey, just for the audience sake, what part of the world are you in right now?
So in the UK, in the Cotswolds, not far from Bath. So if they know it, it's a very pleasant place to be right now.
Well, they likely won't know it. So give us some context. Like where so on that island, is that north, south, east, west?
It's southwest. So it's the bit that juts out towards the south, the bottom left hand corner. So you know, we're sort of directly above Devon and Cornwall, the Cotswolds is. Right. Bath, which is a historic spa town where back in the day the rich used to go to take the spa waters and bathe. So, and then we're very lucky because where we are at the moment, we can walk 5 minutes and we're in complete countryside, or we can walk 5 minutes the other way and we've got a small town that can service everything we want. It's absolutely ideal.
That sounds brilliant. That sounds absolutely brilliant. Is that where they swim the southwest? Southwest corner would be where they swim the English Channel, isn't it? Would be like the
no, that's southeast. So that's the Kent Dover across to.
Sorry, again, like my geography. I'm decent at sales. My geography is a bit rough.
Yeah.
Well, hey, let's get into that. Let's get into sales. So, do you mind just giving a little bit of a shout about your history in sales and what got you started?
I'm in my 37th year of sales, which seems forever now. And what got me started was really quite simple. I came from a marketing and design environment. So I've got a degree in marketing. So selling was never on the cards. It was never anywhere near where I was going to go. But I was working for a publishing company and they brought something in through the front door, which was like, wow. And that was called the Apple Mac, or the Mac Plus, as it was known back then.
Yeah, that box.
Yeah, that strange-looking TARDIS-like box that had the tiniest screen inside the largest container ever known to man. I think it was about 8 inches maximum.
That screen, the box with the tiny screen.
So that came in through the front door, and I have to be honest, I sort of put down my marker pens and all the rest of the things that we used to use as piece of papers to, mock up a marketing piece or a visual or whatever, and fell in love with something that I could type something on and it showed it on the screen. My God, how amazing was that? And as I said, I fell in love with it. And I suddenly decided I wanted to be part of this revolution. I wanted to be part of how this was going to change the world of design, marketing, visualization, absolutely everything. So my first job was working for Apple UK. I went and badgered them until they gave me a job, and that job was in sales. And since then, that's it. I've never looked back. So I started at Apple UK. I then moved over to Xerox, which was quite a change. So moving from the visual to the printed page was quite an interesting step over. And then from then on in, it's been a series of IT companies like HP, IBM, all different types of IT companies, and more print companies and more MSPs, you name it. And that's really what I've done for the last 37 years.
That's such a good story. That is amazing. My parents ran a print shop, so I went in, and that was, I think, the 5th grade, and these strange boxes were there, those apples, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, what is going on? These are kind of cool, right? And they had the hard disk instead of the floppy.
Yeah.
It was so that's awesome that you just you dove into that head first. What were the roles then that you played in sales? Were you always carrying a bag directly? Did you dive into sales leadership? What was
So first role was literally sales rep.
Yeah.
Going
great.
door to door, knocking on marketing company, advertising companies, front doors, and saying, "Look what I've got." At that point, you could carry it around with you.
You carry it around and go plug it in. Yeah.
You just basically took it around with you and held it at the top, power cord in one hand and box in the other, put it on a desk and went, "Let me show you what this can do." And that's how I started in sales. It was very much a case of, it was a bit like the old brush and makeup sales type. I've got a suitcase and here we go. Let me show you what we can do. So that's how it started. I suppose it taught me that how many times a door can be slammed in your face is quite interesting. So knocking on doors and then being told to basically sling it up was probably the most common reaction. But I suppose it makes your skin as hard as nails after a while. You don't take any offence to it. You just move around the corner, knock on the next door and carry on. But it was great. It was great. Yeah. And then after a while, Apple started in the UK bringing in effectively the Apple centres, if you remember those. They started to appear. And I was put in one of those as a sales manager. So I no longer had to carry a box around with me.
Yeah.
I actually had to stand in effectively a demo suite, a showroom, and try and get people to come through the front door, because by that sort of point, we'd moved on from the sort of the Mac SE and the SE Pro, which were the bigger versions of the Plus, and then into the actual desktop, which you couldn't carry. You needed a pallet truck to get those things around. They weighed an absolute ton. Plus, then you needed that's when Apple decided that the monitor and the computer had to be in the same box again, and they brought out these weird, wonderful, coloured, large monitors that literally 2 people had to pick up to put on the desk. So we'd moved from something that was portable, arguably, through to a monstrosity that needed, not far from it, a reinforced desk to hold it.
That's wild that the sales model has to change so much with the design model of the computer, right? That's crazy. Yeah.
And I think, I think that's the big thing. Whether you're new into sales today or you literally, as I was 36, 37 years ago, sales is still the same. It hasn't changed. You still need to do fundamentally the same things. And the first thing you've got to do is create an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about that. We were talking about that before we got in here, and like the core challenges. So you've been in the game for 37 years. you've led teams, you run teams, you've gone door to door. What are the sales of today, B2B sales of today? What's the core challenges that you're seeing in sales?
Yeah, I think there's so many of them in sales today. I think, realistically, sales right now is a mess. Most organizations, sales leaders, CEOs, the C-level, they're in denial. They know the situation's there, but they're living in denial. They're believing that the market will change rather than they have to change. Because historically, that's what's happened. They haven't had to address, their forecasts are wrong, their win rates are failing, their number of quotes they're sending out the door is falling. Everything's in decline. But they believe it's not their problem. They believe it's a market problem. And that's how historically they've waited to the market change rather than they change. And I think that's really it's so wrong now. You need to look at what your business is actually doing. And it's, when you actually start peeling back the layers of the onion, and you start looking at it and you say, what we've experienced in the last 6 months is figures like 28% of sales leaders are now starting to acknowledge the fact that their team will not hit target this year. Now it doesn't sound a big number, but when you're talking millions of pounds or millions of dollars of revenue being lost, that is a big number, and that could be the difference for a business staying in business or a business disappearing, and that's it.
And we're talking, are you talking across all levels of, SMBs to enterprise and B2B? Are you talking where is that focused? Is that mainly the?
I think the statistics are slightly different, whether it be enterprise or whether it be small, medium. It's because of the size of the businesses, there's less impact in small and medium. But when we say less impact, it's only a smaller shift between success and failure.
Right.
Yeah. Enterprises, I would say, from our experience at the moment, they're more in denial than the small and medium businesses, because they realise, small medium have suddenly realised that if they don't fix it now, or they don't look to fix it now, the probability is this time next year they might not be around. Whereas the enterprises are normally got, some form of private equity funding. They've got cash. Their view is, we can ride the storm for a bit longer. We don't have to change. But in reality, they're the ones that are changing the most. They're the ones that are looking at it from the point of view, they're applying more pressure, they're applying more target management, but not in a positive way.
Yeah.
And then the output of that is, if you don't do it, then you don't have a job. And then we'll fire and rehire, assuming that the next person through the door is the magic bullet that's going to fix the problem. Now, an SME doesn't have that privilege. They don't have the availability to go through that. If they're hiring, they've got to hire the right person first time round, because they can't afford the cost of rehire. And invariably, if it doesn't work, they don't bother with rehire.
Well, I was just talking with somebody else over in the UK yesterday, but we were talking about the length of tenure for a sales leader as well as the reps is dramatically decreasing. Mainly because of the pressure. That pressure for success now, and not being able to handle it in the C-suite. What's the remedy? We talked yesterday about. I talked yesterday with about kind of retrenching. Like, how do we help companies retrench and understand what are the core parts of the sales motion that they have to be excellent at, and they need to drive into. What's your thoughts on that? How do we help companies like this actually recognize that this is an issue and then retrench and understand, it's time to put up a backbone of what we're going to do for the future?
I think that when you look at it, you start to talk about the root causes of what's going on in the market. And, a bad forecast isn't necessarily the root cause.
Right.
The root cause is more around the fact that, I would say that there are three major root causes in the market today.
Okay.
The first one is they don't have a sales process. There's no actual sales process in place. And if they think they've got a process, they have never documented it. They don't really know what they're looking at. So they don't really know what they've got to fix. Because if you don't know what your process is, you can't fix it. So you tend to end up with sales teams that work independently of each other. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, independently of the sales manager or sales leader, basically they're just winging it. They're doing their own thing in their own way. And, if you're going to fix it, that's the first thing you've got to fix. You've got to bring everybody to the same page. Sales leaders aren't necessarily true leaders in the market right now. They're normally the successful salespeople who've been promoted or believe that they should be promoted into a leadership role because they were successful in sales. That's normally the way people go into leadership or sales management. At some point, they were successful doing what they did. It doesn't make them a good leader, because the first thing to become a good leader is you've actually got to learn how to be a leader. And a lot of people haven't learned how to be a leader. So they believe, experience. My experience, I was a successful person, therefore my experience will make my sales team experience. Well, reality there is, in fact, most of the time they're just jumping in to fix the problem. They're taking away the learning opportunity, the coaching opportunity by doing that. And again, it's borne out. There's no process. There's coaching, mentoring, whatever title you put to it. That's part of the process. It's part of what a leader needs to do. And then I think the other problem that a lot of sales companies fall into at the moment, they treat every deal that comes through the system as unique. Which again, if you do that, you've either got a product to sell or you've got a service to sell. It's one or the other, but they're not unique. The service and product is not unique. So therefore, if you have a process, you will have a repeatable framework. So it allows people to follow that framework. And that's born out of the ones, your sales reps, your sales individuals who are successful. They're normally the people who have the right attitude to selling that product. It doesn't mean that they're the best salespeople. They've just adapted to a framework that works for them. So why not make that framework repeatable? Why not give it to the underperformers and say, look, why don't you try and follow this? But again, it brings you full circle. To be able to do that, you've got to be able to coach. You've got to be able to lead. You've got to be able to get people to understand. So I think the fundamental problem when you talk about this, the reality of no sales process is, a process doesn't limit a salesperson's creativity. It's there to amplify and focus their conversations. Yeah. And if you can do that, more of your salespeople will be successful.
Well, I liken it to this. I've used this analogy before. I got to say, it's harder to use when you're over in the UK. But hey, the NFL, the football has gone over and had a game in London. But so I just look at American football.
Yeah.
And so American football, and when you start to look at it, is extremely regimented. meaning you have 11 people on a field, and they're all on the same page in terms of what they're going to do for this next play, right? They have a play. They're all on the same page in terms of what the goal is, what the accomplishment is, and how they're going to do it. But they do things called audibles all the time, right? And they also, within that framework of the play, they're extremely creative, right? There are people that if they just run the play robotically, right, it just doesn't work, right? But if they throw in if they own their own position and run a fake a little bit better or something like that, it becomes extremely creative. So I had a mentor once that told me that it's creativity for creativity's sake in sales is nonsense, because you end up with things like triangle doors, right? That just make zero sense. But creativity within a framework is beauty. It allows you to excel in ways that you never had an opportunity before as a team. So it sounds like that's really what you're talking about is how do we give one a process that we can follow that tends to work. It's not magic. It's just, here are the things that we have to do and commit to doing.
Yeah, very much so.
But then, within that, how do we help people's creativity bloom? And that's the beauty of the system. So how do you start to dive in then with companies? I mean, because I agree with you. Sometimes there's a lot of people that are out there that are hiring the top sales leader. They're hiring fixers instead of leaders, right? Fixers are going to dive in on everything. Leaders are going to set a framework and a vision and help you do that. How are you helping them become leaders? How are you diving in and saying, let's shift this mindset?
Yeah. So we move on to the other. So what we have sort of normally in our second, the root, the bad assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the list could be endless, to be honest with you. Every company you talk to, you start diving into bad assumptions, what they believe rather than what they know. Yeah. And one I always use, which is quite an interesting one, I say quite a lot to people, sales is not an art form. Yeah. It goes back to a bit, like you just said, there needs to be a degree of creativity, but it's not its own art form. Salespeople weren't born to exist. Actually, they were born, they sit in a cot, they cry. They didn't sit there and go, today, I'm going to be a salesperson. From the moment they were lying, they didn't magically become salespeople because that's what they thought they were born to be. And I think the other thing is, and it always goes back to me and maybe I oversell this at times, but I'm a strong believer in it. That's how I was brought up through sales. A process requires discipline. You need to be disciplined in what you do. Yeah. And there's some other bad assumptions. And I think the other big one is for salespeople, and I think this is where a lot of salespeople fail, is around their buyers, around their customers. Customers aren't necessarily educated in what you want to sell them. Yeah. When they first come into your world, yeah, they're normally there for one reason, is for understanding. They're confused. They know they need something, but they don't know what they need. Yeah. And I think this is where the perception then comes in, because they're not understanding, or they're not doing what they should do with that customer. The leaders then they think the salesperson's lazy. They're not actually doing their job. And you hear that a lot. And I hear that a lot with sales leaders when they're reviewing their teams. Oh, well, that person, I don't think he's long for this world because he's lazy or she's lazy. That's not actually the case at all. You have no proof to the fact that they're lazy. The fact that they can't uncover what the customer needs again, brings you full circle back to, have you ever trained them, onboarded them? Do they actually know what they're selling? Do they actually know why the customer needs to buy your product? Just because they were selling a similar product in another company and hitting 150% of the target does not mean when they walk through your door, they're going to do exactly the same. You're a different business. You have a different way of positioning your product. And if you don't know how to position your product from a sales perspective, they're going to struggle.
I mean, that breaking through that barrier, I mean, that's a sale in and of itself, right? So breaking through that barrier of understanding what those assumptions are that are driving them to, you know, I have a sweatshirt that says salespeople are made, not born, because it's the truth, right? It is. We have this, and we all push against discipline. We all push against accountability. I mean, it's just something that as a human nature we do. But helping them battle those assumptions. What is like the core assumption that you find in most? You're going into an organization that they don't have a sales process. It's a little bit of a mess. They don't know what their forecast is. They don't know how to retrench and fight the battle that's going on right now. What's their core mindset and assumption that is getting in the way?
I think the one we hear the most, and it's quite a simple phrase, and it's the most dangerous phrase that we hear as an assumption, is if you've asked a specific question around how they do something, and the answer you get back, and we get it, and I guarantee 100% of the time, 100% of the conversations, at some point we'll hear it, I don't know. It's always been done that way. That is the most dangerous assumption that lives within any business or any sales team. Nobody's challenging the status quo. They just believe because it was always done that way, that's the way it has to be done.
That's got to be such a big qualifying signal for you. Like if their next answer to the question is, like if the next question that you ask when they say, I don't know, is, what do you want to find out? Like exactly. That has got to be like a light bulb signal for, all right, let's figure this out.
And funny enough, it's normally the C-level or the senior management of a business that it comes out of their mouths. You don't tend to hear it from the sales individuals or let's say a mid-level sales manager. You don't tend to hear it down that end because they're trying to change, because you know at the end of the day they're at the arrow point. Yeah. They're trying to change what's happening. It's higher up the organization where the change actually needs to happen. You tend to hear that statement. You know, I had it recently with a fintech startup that's based down in Bristol, not far from where we are. And they've been around 3-4 years now. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they've gone through the first round of funding, but they're struggling. They're really, you know, and it was just it was an off chance conversation. Yeah. I you know, the usual thing, you pick the phone up, you ring somebody and go, can I have a chat about whatever it was? And they went, oh, timing, brilliant. You know, because at that point the founder was the receptionist, the sales staff. He was everything, you know, and and we were talking, and he just said, but we've always done it that way. And I just said to him, as you said, but don't you think it's time to change? Because if you're not getting enough growth to go to your next round of funding, then the business is just dead, it's stalled, it's not moving. And he went, we've never really thought about it. I've never thought about it.
Yeah.
And
that's a great question. I mean, it's a great just when you hit on those, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I don't know. I got a buddy that calls them the IDK questions. And it's such a brilliant gift to them, right? It really is. It's just like, oh man, I don't know. I want to find out. Okay. Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, sort of, always three in our stack of root causes then comes back to the salespeople themselves, the DNA of the salespeople, the will to sell. Yeah.
Mhm.
We tend to put it at the end of our conversations rather than the beginning, because what we're not looking for is for the C-level or the sales leader to turn around and go, yeah, I knew it had to be the salespeople that were at fault. Because as soon as that happens, they shut down any other conversation that you need to have with them about
Yeah.
actually the fault is you.
Yeah.
The fault is the business. It's the fault. You're the fault, not the salesperson. So we always leave sort of the DNA and the will to sell and all that side of it to the very end. Now, yes, there probably could be some major problems in amongst that, because, it's amazing how many people have moved into sales from various walks of life thinking sales is easy. Yeah. I had, we were doing a conversation with a team the other day, and I asked one individual why they came into sales. And their simple answer was, I've got a mate who's in sales and he earns an absolute fortune and I want to do the same. And that was it. That was his, no other reason for moving into sales. The likelihood is, will he be in sales much longer? Probably not. I don't know. But his only desire was to copy his mate.
Yeah, we too frequently the accidental career, right?
Yeah, very much so.
And or the career that's looking at that's just has the dollar signs and like, oh my gosh, I see that they can do it, and I can talk as well as they can.
Yeah.
But it's which is one of the reasons why I love working. Quite frankly, why I love working with salespeople, because the impact that you could make on their lives is tremendous.
Yeah.
By getting back to just understanding and the basics and coaching. I mean, it's not revolutionary. Sales process and the idea of a sales process and the idea of how to do it, not revolutionary. Battling the mindsets and that type of stuff and the assumptions, again, not revolutionary, just impactful. And when you say things haven't changed over 37 years, right? That's what I think I'm getting at, is what I'm hearing is there is this core that regardless of where the profession goes, until we get replaced by robots, right? There is this core that we need, that is critical to just the successful execution of how we relate with others and how we help others and how we serve others, and sales. And I love how you're attacking it. It seems like you got a really good handle on that. If you were to give a word of advice to, let's do 2 words of advice, one to a CEO and somebody that's struggling to gain revenue. That's your first word of advice. And the second word of advice is to a salesperson that's struggling to gain traction. Right. So what would those be right now? So a word of advice to that CEO that's they're thinking it's the market conditions. They're thinking it's all this, like we talked about. What's the one thing you'd say to them right now?
The conversations recently we've had it's quite an interesting one, because CEOs tend to be sat there in slight denial, as I said earlier, denial, oblivion of what actually is really happening. They treat sales very much as a necessary evil to their business. They don't really understand it, because not many CEOs come from a sales background. They like to think they're the best salespeople, but they invariably aren't. And I always say to them, when they're looking at sales, I always say to them, I say, would you tolerate the way that your sales team is being run and is performing if it was HR or finance? And the answer you always get back is absolutely not. And then, of course, you then back to, well, why? Yeah, why are you being reactive to the problem? Why are you not being proactive? If finance had a problem, you would be all over it. You wouldn't be waiting for it to sort itself out.
Mm-hmm.
You would know. You would want it sorted immediately. You would work through the problem. Why aren't you doing it with sales?
That's great. Great question. Great word of advice to CEOs. Ask yourself, CEOs that are listening, make sure you're asking yourself that question. The second one, you have a rep right now that's out there, and he's got that CEO that's not asking themselves the question, and he's out there on the front lines, and he or she is struggling a bit. What's the word of advice in this day and age that you give to a struggling salesperson?
What we try to teach the salespeople, or what we're trying to educate them in, is very much their job is to align themselves to the customer. Yeah, educate the customer and guide the customer. Yeah, if you can do those three things, the reality is you don't actually have to sell to the customer. And that's what a lot of salespeople struggle with. They jump in too early. You know, they're sending, another statement I use is sales is not about happy ears and proposals. Yeah. Don't sit there and believe what you've heard. Yeah. Actually challenge what you've heard. Because if you send a proposal too early and you haven't aligned yourself, you haven't educated, and you haven't guided that client or that prospective buyer, they ain't buying anything off you. And just getting a proposal on the table is a waste of time. It's a waste of the 30, 40 minutes it took you to do it. You could have done something more proactive, because that will just hit your forecast. You believe, or they believe, it's a nailed deal. As people like, I've got that nailed on. That's happening this week, next week. And then next week becomes a month, becomes 2 months, 3 months. It becomes the ghosted deal, the stalled deal that never will come to reality until somebody else takes over that, rings the customer, and they normally turn around and go, oh yeah, we bought something 3 months ago.
Because it never was a deal. Yeah. No.
Because it never was. You never had a deal there because you hadn't aligned yourself to what that customer was about. And at the end of the day, we've all heard it through multiple training. Selling is about trust. It's about empathy. It's all those things. Yes, it is. But at the end of the day, if the reality is buyers buy off people, they don't buy a product, then you have to align yourself to that customer.
Yeah, and at the risk of us going on for a lot longer, I would say one thing on this. There's a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. It defines trust as confidence and competence. You need to have those two things. I believe I'm remembering that correctly, but it's what you really are telling people. And at least in me restating it in my language, right, is that alignment is you need to absolutely understand enough about what the heck is going on so you can show you're competent to educate and guide. And then people will I find they respect you, and it's great. So great words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Richard. Hey, how do people find you online if they want to chat more about this, which I'd highly recommend everybody. Make sure you're reaching out to Richard. How do they find you?
You can contact us via the website, which is noodlesparkgroup.co.uk. There's a contact form there. There's also a tool on there that allows you to actually answer some of the questions that we raised today. So you know whether or not you're ready. You have a sales readiness platform in front of you. So that's one way. Otherwise, drop me an email at Richard at noodlesparkgroup.co.uk. And, we're always happy to have conversations. The more conversations we have, the better.
Wonderful. And you on LinkedIn as well?
On LinkedIn, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find the Noodle Spark page on LinkedIn as well.
All right. Well, we didn't even get into the story of the Noodle Spark name. I'm going to have you back and chat on more like that. Maybe in 6 months or so we grab another time. But for now, any final words of wisdom for the crew that's listening?
Yeah, I would just say, remember, sales is an art form. It's creative, realistically, but it's more of a science. Yeah, but if you treat it like a system, your revenue is going to grow. You're not going to misfire as much. The best teams that I've worked with are winning now because they stopped chasing silver bullets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they started, fixing fundamentals. They actually do have a sales process, and they have a degree of sales enablement around it. It's not about buying more tool sets. It's about buying the right ones and implementing them in the right way.
I love it. 100% agree. All right, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much for taking time to listen. Make sure you're liking, sharing, subscribing, and most of all, reaching out to Richard, getting some more words of advice directly from a conversation with him. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Let's and on to the next time for the Art and Science of Complex Sales. Keep shining bright. Have an amazing, amazing day. We'll talk to you soon.